Now, for more on the president's war plan for Afghanistan, we are joined by Juan Carlos Zarate, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. He also served as Deputy National Security Advisor for combating terrorism during the Bush administration. Welcome back.
Thanks, Martin.
Reports suggest that President Obama will send an additional 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. How might these added forces change the way the US and NATO are conducting the war?
Well, the number fits with what we were anticipating. We know that General McChrystal's set of options that he presented to the president ranged from the low teens up to 80-some thousand troops. And it appears that, given the reports we're hearing, the president's picking the middle ground. What these troops are intended to do is to allow General McChrystal and the commanders on the ground to contest space where we have not contested the Taliban in the past, in particular in the east and the south. And so these troops in the first instance will allow us to actually confront Taliban where they have control of territory, and then importantly to keep the territory. Because in the past what has happened is we've fought the Taliban, expelled them from villages and territory, but not been able to hold the territory. And so these troops will help do that. And importantly, I expect a number of trainers, probably upwards of 6,000-7,000 to be a part of that group, that will then be part of embedding with the Afghan police and military so that you build the capacity of the local authorities to actually take over security eventually.
Okay, so that's the plan. And roughly by doing the math, the number of troops in Afghanistan would come up around 100,000. Far less than was used in Iraq. So do you think that this will succeed in Afghanistan?
Well, I think the hope is that we can change the momentum on the ground. And I think momentum here is obviously important because it's not only what is happening on the ground, but the perception of what's happening on the ground. There's been a lot of doomsday talk about what's happening in Afghanistan. And I think part of the challenge here is changing the momentum, gaining ground, holding the ground, and showing progress in terms of working with local authorities. Keep in mind as well, we not only have U.S. troops, which would number close to 100,000, but also upwards of about 42 to 43,000 NATO troops. And that number could increase depending on what the NATO forces decide to do. Not likely, though. But overall, I think it's important that the troops get into battle, get on the ground, and that we start to see a shift in momentum, which is what General McChrystal has been hoping for.
The president's also talking about these sort of exit points if the plan is not working. Is that a realistic way to conduct a war?
Well, I don't think you necessarily have commanders on the ground worrying about exit ramps, but I do think the Department of Defense, the military, and our diplomats and politicians need to have in mind end states and goals in mind and points at which we need to evaluate whether or not we're succeeding and whether or not we need to adjust. I think the president is very worried, not only about the question of troop numbers, but the question of how long we're actually going to be in Afghanistan. This is perhaps the trickiest question for the president, and part of the reason I think he asked his advisors to come back with information about what those exit ramps might look like and at what point we could start to adjust to allow the Afghans to take greater control of their security. It also, by the way, gives him a political out so that he can legitimately say in, let's say, 6 months' time, that I'm reviewing the strategy again, reviewing where we're going, without getting hit politically as he was this time.
Juan Zarate, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.